The Baltic Sea is not an ocean. It is a room, 700 kilometers long, 200 wide at its broadest point, and in the waters between the Danish Straits and the Gulf of Finland, rarely deeper than 50 meters, a shallow, enclosed body of water that experienced navigators describe not in the language of open ocean sailing, but in the language of confinement. The Baltic is surrounded by 9 nations. Every stretch of its coastline belongs to someone with an opinion about who should be sailing it and on what terms. On a clear day from a warship's bridge wing, you can see the lights of 2 countries simultaneously. In fog, you navigate by radar and hope that the contacts around you are doing the same. Since 2014, Russia's Baltic Fleet, headquartered at Kaliningrad, the Russian exclave wedged between Poland and Lithuania on the sea's southern shore, has operated with a confidence that, in the assessment of NATO naval analysts, crossed several times from assertiveness into outright aggression. Russian warships and aircraft have executed maneuvers in the Baltic that would, in any other context, trigger formal incident reports and diplomatic demarches. In the Baltic, they have become something closer to a pattern. The Russian naval culture that prizes aggressive seamanship, where a commanding officer who forces a NATO ship to maneuver earns institutional respect rather than censure, finds its fullest expression in this particular room, surrounded by the coastlines of adversaries and former Soviet neighbors, where every nautical mile of water is a point of doctrine. The Udaloy-class destroyer knew its business. At 7,900 tons, it was neither the most modern nor the most capable vessel in the Russian Baltic inventory. But it was large, it was fast, and it carried the specific institutional confidence of a ship whose crew had executed this kind of operation before. Not as a rehearsal, but as a standing practice. The Udaloy had a history in these waters, and its captain understood something that his U.S. counterpart was about to discover, that in the Baltic, the most effective pressure is not the dramatic gesture. It is the sustained proximity, the slow encroachment, the shoulder. At 8:14 a.m., the Arleigh-Burke-class guided missile destroyer was operating in the central Baltic on a northbound freedom of navigation track, 62 nautical miles west of the Kaliningrad coast. The morning was gray, low overcast, visibility approximately 6 nautical miles, a moderate westerly swell that put a gentle roll in both ships and made the surface of the Baltic the color of pewter. The destroyer held course 355 degrees at 14 knots. Standard patrol posture, everything nominal on the surface search radar. At 8:14 a.m., a new contact appeared at bearing 118 degrees, range 11.3 nautical miles, emerging from a cluster of commercial traffic that had been transiting southbound through the eastern portion of the lane. The contact separated from the cluster with a purposefulness that the CIC operator recognized before the classification arrived. Bridge CIC, new military contact, bearing 118, range 11.3 miles, speed 22 knots, course 312 degrees. Classification pending, profile consistent with Udaloy-class destroyer. The officer of the deck acknowledged. 22 knots on a course of 312 degrees from bearing 118 placed the contact on a direct intercept line with the destroyer's track. The geometry was immediate and unambiguous. At combined closure, the two ships would be at closest approach in approximately 18 minutes. 18 minutes was not long enough for uncertainty. The captain was already on the bridge. Udaloy, the CIC confirmed 40 seconds later, as the contact's radar emission profile resolved against the library. Probable Baltic Fleet unit, active surface search radar, frigate M-band, no weapons emissions, speed now 24 knots. 24 knots. The Udaloy had accelerated in the time between first detection and classification. It was not approaching to observe. It was approaching to arrive at a specific position, alongside the destroyer, matching course, matching speed, before the U.S. ship could process the encounter and develop a response. The Russian doctrine for this maneuver was not improvised. It had been executed in these waters dozens of times against multiple NATO navies with a consistency that made it recognizable in the moment of first contact. The intent was the shoulder, pull alongside at close range, match every speed change, ignore every communication, and hold that position for as long as the captain chose. An hour, 2 hours, longer. Let the proximity do the work. Let the math of two large warships at 200 yards be the argument. CPA estimate, 1,900 yards. 1,900 yards was the opening bid. In the Baltic, where commercial traffic and confined geometry reduced the tactical space available, 1,900 yards was not the Udaloy's destination. It was its starting position. The captain stood at the bridge window and watched the contact's bearing track. The Udaloy was holding a consistent bearing drift that would bring it parallel to the destroyer's track and then begin the slow lateral compression that was the shoulder maneuver's signature. The rate of drift told him how aggressive the approach was intended to be. He calculated the geometry. At current speeds and relative bearings, the Udaloy would achieve parallel course at approximately 800 yards in roughly 11 minutes. Then begin the slow encroachment that was the point of the exercise. He said nothing. He watched. At 8:19 a.m., Channel 16 received a transmission, not from the Udaloy, from the Russian Kaliningrad Maritime Coordination Center, the shore-based installation that managed Russian naval and commercial traffic in the eastern Baltic. The transmission was calm, professional, and in accented English. Warship operating in grid reference coordinates. This is Kaliningrad Maritime Control. You are approaching restricted exercise area. Recommend course adjustment to west. Please confirm. There was no restricted exercise area in the coordinates given. The claim had no standing under UNCLOS, no published notum, no prior notification to NATO maritime authorities. The transmission was a framing device, an attempt to establish a radio record that would, in any subsequent documentation of the encounter, give Russia the ability to describe whatever followed as occurring in the context of a U.S. ship that had been warned and refused to comply. The legal architecture was thin. The communication existed to be cited later, not to be acted upon now. The captain looked at his communication officer. Log it. No response. Channel 16 returned to its standard ambient static. The Udaloy was at 6.1 nautical miles and closing. The first friction arrived at 8:23 a.m. unannounced from the weather. The Baltic's autumn air over cold water produces a phenomenon that Baltic navigators understand, but surface search radar operators find deeply inconvenient. Anomalous radar propagation, in which the electromagnetic waves from a surface search radar bend downward along the temperature gradient between the cold water surface and the warmer air above it, producing extended range detections of distant contacts alongside bizarre suppression of nearby ones. The CIWS Spy 1 radar had been tracking the Udaloy cleanly since classification. At 8:23 a.m., a propagation event produced a brief return anomaly. The Udaloy's blip fractured into 3 overlapping returns, each suggesting a slightly different position for 7 seconds before the system's filtering algorithms resolved the returns back to a single confirmed track. 7 seconds. In normal circumstances, a processing note. In a developing standoff with a closing Udaloy, 7 seconds of positional ambiguity was enough to introduce a question about the exact CPA geometry, a question that took another 40 seconds to fully resolve as the system rebuilt its track confidence. CPA revised 1,400 yards. Confidence high. The revision was downward. The Udaloy had been closing more aggressively than the initial geometry suggested. The shoulder was going to be tighter than 800 yards, while CPA 1,400 yards and continuing to close. By 8:27 a.m., the Udaloy was visible from the bridge. At 4.2 nautical miles and 6-mile visibility, it was a distinct shape on the gray sea, the blocky utilitarian silhouette that distinguished Russian warship design from the angular, stealthy lines of U.S. surface combatants. The Udaloy looked like a warship the way warships looked before warship designers began optimizing for radar cross-section reduction. Exposed systems on deck, a superstructure that announced itself against the horizon without apology. It was 7,900 tons of Soviet legacy engineering that had been built to be seen, and that was, in this moment, making full use of that quality. The bridge crew could see it clearly. The crew of the Udaloy could see them clearly. No communication on any frequency, no response to the 2 routine navigation safety calls the officer of the deck had made on Channel 16 since first contact. The standard maritime requirement for vessels converging in restricted waters to establish communication and coordinate maneuvering intentions was being deliberately ignored, not failed to meet, deliberately ignored. In Russian Baltic doctrine, the silence was the message. We will do what we intend to do, and your radio calls are irrelevant to that intention. The officer of the deck made his 3rd and final safety call at 8:29 a.m. He identified the destroyer, stated its course and speed, and asked the Udaloy to confirm its intentions regarding the closing range. The Baltic frequencies carried the call across the water. The Udaloy carried the call to its radio operators. The Udaloy's radio operators had instructions. No response. Channel 16 had now been unanswered by the Udaloy for 15 minutes of converging approach. In the maritime world, 15 minutes of silence from a vessel whose trajectory was converging with yours was not a communication failure. It was a position statement. CPA 980 yards. Below 1,000 yards in the Baltic's confined operational environment, the tactical picture had a different quality. than it would an open ocean. The coastlines of Latvia and Lithuania were on the radar display. Commercial traffic in the corridor, 4 vessels, was being tracked simultaneously. The confined geometry reduced the maneuver space available in a way that made CPA numbers feel smaller than they would in open water. 980 yards in the Baltic was not 980 yards in the Pacific. It was 980 yards of a room that was already crowded. The captain made his first calculated escalation. Activate electronic intercept package. Full spectrum passive. Log all emissions. The destroyer's electronic intercept system began cataloging every electromagnetic emission from the Udaloy, radar frequencies, communication bands, electronic system signatures, building a complete record of the Russian ship's electronic order of battle in the context of an active approach. The record itself was operationally valuable, but the intent of the order at this moment was secondary to its signal. We are measuring you. We know what your systems are doing. We have been measuring you since before you arrived at this bearing, and we will still be measuring you after this is over. Whether the Udaloy's electronic warfare operators detected the intercept sweep was uncertain. Whether they reported it to their captain was equally uncertain. What was certain was that 980 yards on a gray Baltic morning, with a U.S. destroyer holding course 355 degrees and a Russian Udaloy on a converging track that was going to produce a parallel course situation at a distance the bridge crews could quantify in shouting range. The psychological weight of the encounter was building in the way the maneuver was designed to build it. At 8:34 a.m., the geometry produced its first critical moment. The Udaloy achieved parallel course at 720 yards, matching the destroyer's heading of 355 degrees, its speed slowing from 24 knots to the destroyer's 14. The two ships now running north together through the Baltic like a paired formation that had not agreed to pair. 720 yards, port to port, bow to bow on the radar display. The gap between them visible through the bridge windows as a stretch of pewter gray water that was not large enough for comfort and was, by Russian Baltic doctrine, a starting position rather than a destination. The shoulder had achieved its initial geometry. Now it would compress. At 8:36 a.m., the Udaloy adjusted heading by 2 degrees to starboard toward the destroyer. The CPA counter, which had stabilized at 720 yards during the parallel course phase, updated immediately. CPA 680 yards. Contact adjusting course toward 2 degrees. Imperceptible as a ship movement. Enormous as a message. The Udaloy was beginning the compression that would, if allowed to continue at this rate, reduce the gap between the two ships to a distance that made maneuvering in the Baltic's swell genuinely hazardous. The moderate westerly swell, 1.5 to 2 feet, was not significant for either vessel independently. At 200 yards of separation, with both ships rolling on the same swell period, the synchronization of rolls could, in a worst-case resonance event, reduce the effective gap between the hulls below any reasonable safety margin. The captain was aware of this. He was also aware that the Udaloy captain was aware of this, and that the awareness of mutual risk was part of the doctrine. The shoulder maneuver derived its pressure from the shared understanding that if either ship made a sudden course change, the consequences fell on both. The U.S. destroyer could not maneuver away without presenting its stern quarter to a 7,900-ton ship at close range in a rolling sea. The Udaloy could not compress indefinitely without accepting collision risk that its own command structure had not authorized. Both ships were locked in a geometry that rewarded steadiness and penalized reaction. The cost of standing was not free. The engineering watch had been maintaining the destroyer's speed at exactly 14 knots for 29 minutes, an RPM setting that was burning fuel at a rate calculated for transit, not for a sustained two-ship formation at close quarters in a Baltic swell. The ship's stabilizers were working continuously against the cross-swell component, drawing hydraulic system power at a rate that the engineering officer had flagged for the log. These were not critical wear items. They were costs. The zero on the yield side had costs on the system side that didn't appear in any headline. CPA, 560 yards. The second friction arrived at 8:41 a.m. from directly overhead. The bridge's radar display registered 2 new contacts at the same moment the EW operator spoke. Fast movers. 2 contacts. Bearing 090, altitude 800 feet, speed 520 knots. Track indicates direct overflight. Classification, probable, Su-24 fencer pair. Su-24, the Russian Baltic Fleet's primary fixed-wing asset for maritime surface operations. The same aircraft type that had, in multiple documented incidents in the Baltic and Black Sea, executed low-altitude passes over U.S. vessels at distances and altitudes that NATO had formally characterized in diplomatic protests as unsafe and inconsistent with standard aviation practice. 800 feet inbound at 520 knots from bearing 090 meant the 2 aircraft would pass over the destroyer in approximately 45 seconds. The timing was not coincidental. The Udaloy had been holding position at 560 yards and compressing when the aircraft appeared. The Su-24s were arriving from the east, from the direction of the Kaliningrad Air Base, on a track that put them directly between the 2 ships in the vertical dimension. The simultaneous arrival of a surface threat at 560 yards and an aerial overflight at 800 feet was a misdirection sequence, a coordinated attempt to split the crew's attention between 2 simultaneous stimuli in the hope that the focus required to track the aircraft overhead would produce the moment of hesitation, the fractional reallocation of attention that allowed the Udaloy to compress the surface gap below 400 yards before the bridge crew reestablished full focus on the surface picture. The CIC was tracking both threats simultaneously. That was not the problem. The problem was the bridge, where the visual and psychological impact of 2 Su-24s at 800 feet, passing at 520 knots, produced in the human nervous system a response that was not easily suppressed by training. The sound arrived before the aircraft were visible, a frequency that penetrated the bridge structure and registered in the chest before the ears. Then, the visual. 2 swept wing shapes crossing from starboard to port at 800 feet, close enough that the underside markings were readable, close enough that the rooster tail of disturbed air they left behind them rocked the destroyer's radio antennas in their wake. The helmsman did not move. Course 355. Course 355. But his knuckles were white on the wheel for the 4 seconds of the overflight, and for the 12 seconds after it, before the sound faded and the aftershock of the air movement through the upper works settled. The captain had not looked up. His eyes had remained on the surface search display during the entire overflight. When the sound faded, he spoke. CPA? CPA 480 yards. Udaloy adjusted heading 3 degrees starboard during overflight. The Udaloy had moved during the aircraft's pass, not dramatically, 3 degrees, but timed precisely to the moment when the Su-24s occupied the bridge crew's attention. The coordination between the surface and air assets had been executed with the smoothness of a maneuver that had been rehearsed until its timing was automatic. The aircraft were the distraction. The course adjustment was the purpose. 480 yards. The barrel of the CIWS had not moved. The weapon systems had not activated. The destroyer was holding course 355 degrees at 14 knots, as it had been doing for 37 minutes, as it intended to continue doing, as the captain had decided it would do, before the Udaloy appeared on the radar at bearing 118, but 480 yards in a Baltic swell, with a 7,900-ton ship adjusting toward you by 3 degrees and 2 Su-24s, establishing a precedent for coordinated overflight and compressed maneuvers, was the point in this encounter where the arithmetic of the situation had its sharpest edge. The captain activated the Seahawk, not launched. Engines. The MH-60R's turbines started on the flight deck, audible through the hull as a vibration that the Udaloy's crew at 480 yards could feel through the water if they were paying attention. More relevantly, could see on their thermal imaging as the heat bloom of 2 turbine exhausts appearing on the destroyer's stern. And then the captain did something that was not in the Udaloy captain's playbook. He increased speed to 18 knots, not a dramatic acceleration, not a course change, not any deviation from 355 degrees, simply 4 knots of additional speed. A choice the Udaloy's captain now had to respond to, because matching that speed at 480 yards in a Baltic swell required its own decision. The Udaloy had been controlling the pace of the encounter, setting the closure rate, timing the compression, coordinating with the aircraft. The speed increase transferred the pace back to the U.S. ship. The Udaloy could match it, but matching it at 480 yards and 18 knots in a cross swell required a helmsman's full attention and eliminated the bandwidth available for the additional 2-degree course adjustment that had been the next step of the compression sequence. At 8:47 a.m., the Udaloy's course adjusted 1 degree to port, away, not dramatically, not an emergency alteration. 1 degree, registered on the CIC display as a slight rightward drift of the contact's bearing track. The CPA counter responded immediately. CPA, 510 yards. Udaloy bearing drift to port. Opening. The captain said nothing. He maintained 18 knots and course 355. The Seahawk engines were running on the flight deck. At 8:49 a.m., the Su-24 pair executed a second overflight. Same track, same altitude, same 520 knot speed. This time Having already experienced the overflight once, the bridge crew had contextualized it. The sound arrived. The visual came. The helmsman's hands were steady before the aircraft crossed the bow. Course 355. Course 355. The CIC had not required any instruction from the captain to maintain full surface track on the Udaloy during the overflight. The crew had been burned by that approach once, and the lesson had been filed. The Udaloy did not adjust course during the second overflight. The window that the first pass had created, the 3-degree adjustment during the moment of maximum bridge distraction, had not been replicated. The misdirection had failed to produce its intended effect a second time because the crew had already solved it. At 8:52 a.m., the second Su-24 pass complete, the Udaloy began a sustained course change to port. Not the 1-degree drift of 8:47 a.m., a deliberate heading adjustment, 3 degrees, 5 degrees, the bearing track on the CIC display, moving rightward with the steadiness of a vessel that had made a decision. CPA 560 yards, 620, 700. Contact Udaloy. Bearing opening. Speed reducing to 16 knots. The Udaloy was disengaging, not retreating in any dramatic sense. Returning to the course it had been on before the intercept. Southbound, back toward the Kaliningrad area. Its bearing drift on the radar was the quiet arithmetic of a maneuver concluded. The shoulder had lasted 38 minutes at close quarters, had compressed to a minimum of 480 yards, had been accompanied by 2 coordinated Su-24 overflights timed for maximum effect, and had produced from the U.S. destroyer precisely 0 degrees of course deviation and 0 knots of speed reduction, until the captain had chosen to add 4 knots, which was not retreat, which was pace. The 2 aircraft made one more orbit of the area at higher altitude, 3,000 feet, clearly a surveillance pass rather than an intimidation run, and then turned east, back toward Kaliningrad. At 9:04 a.m., the Udaloy was at 3.8 nautical miles and continuing south. The helmsman was relieved at 9:15 a.m. at the standard watch rotation. He had been on the wheel for 1 hour and 4 minutes, including 38 minutes of having a 7,900-ton Russian warship at between 480 and 720 yards on his port side, while 2 Su-24 fencers made coordinated overflights at 800 feet. His relief took the wheel. He walked aft. He did not go to the fantail. He went to the mess and poured coffee and sat down with it. And when someone asked him how the watch had been, he said fine and meant it and didn't mean it. And both of those things were true simultaneously. The captain filed his situation report at 9:30 a.m. The report noted the Udaloy's approach, the unauthorized claim of restricted exercise area by Kaliningrad Maritime Control, the 2 Su-24 overflights, the coordinated compression and overflight misdirection attempt, and the successful maintenance of course and speed throughout the encounter. 2 paragraphs. Clinical. It did not note that the captain had not had breakfast. It did not note that he had been on the bridge for 2 hours and 40 minutes before this encounter began, reviewing the previous night's intelligence traffic. It noted what happened and what didn't happen. That was sufficient. 1 Udaloy-class destroyer, 2 Su-24 Fencer overflights, 38 minutes at close quarters, 480 yards, closest point of approach, 0 degrees of course deviation, 0 radio responses to the Kaliningrad Maritime Control Claim, 0 inches yielded. The Baltic is a room. Every ship in it is visible to every other ship, and every coast, and every intelligence apparatus with a surface search radar and a satellite feed. In a room that's small, the discipline of not flinching is not abstract. It is visible. It is measured in yards and minutes and degrees of course correction. That didn't happen. The Udaloy came to the shoulder and found a ship that was already decided. The aircraft came to the distraction and found a crew that had been waiting for it. The geometry resolved, the only way geometry resolves, when one side of it does not move. Some pressure is designed to be felt. The point is to feel it and hold anyway. That is not a procedure. It is not a regulation. It is the thing that either exists in a crew before the contact appears on the radar, or it doesn't. On a gray Baltic morning, with the coastlines of 9 nations watching, and the pewter surface of a closed sea, carrying the sound of fencer engines east toward Kaliningrad, it existed.